Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today is a day that many were anticipating, and many more were dreading. As of today, the clock has run out. The sentence has been served. The gates have opened. Joshua James Duggar, the former reality television star from the once beloved TLC show 19 Kids and Counting, is a free man. He has been released from the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. His time behind bars is officially over. And for countless people watching this story unfold, the survivors, the advocates, the former fans, and just those of us who believe in justice, this day lands with a heavy, unsettling thud. This isn't just another celebrity news story. This is the final, chilling chapter of a years-long saga that dismantled a carefully constructed image of wholesome, conservative, family values piety and revealed something profoundly dark and disturbing festering beneath the surface. His release isn't an end to the story, it's the beginning of a new, uncertain, and for many, a terrifying new reality. So today, we are going to do a full, comprehensive deep dive. We are going to trace the entire arc of this story, from the very beginning, through the hidden scandals, the shocking investigations, the dramatic federal trial, and into this moment, his release. We need to understand not just what happened, but how it happened, and what it truly means now that he is out. Let's begin at what we once thought was the beginning. For millions of Americans in the mid-2000s, the Duggar family was a phenomenon. They were an enigma. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar, with their 19 children, all with names starting with J, living in a massive, custom-built home in Tontitown, Arkansas. They preached a strict version of Christianity, rooted in the Institute in Basic Life Principles, or IBLP. They spoke of courtship instead of dating, of modest dress, of being joyfully available in marriage, and of raising a quiver full of children. They were, to their audience, a bastion of traditional values in a rapidly changing world. And at the center of this large family was the eldest son, Josh. He was presented as the responsible big brother, the one who would someday follow in his father's footsteps. He was a political operative, working for the Family Research Council, a conservative lobbying group in Washington, D.C. He was a married man, to Anna Keller, starting his own family. He was the heir apparent to the Duggar legacy. But that legacy, we would all come to learn, was built on a foundation of lies and secrets. A foundation that began to crack wide open back in 2015. In May of 2015, the entertainment news site In Touch Weekly, acting on a tip, filed a Freedom of Information Act request for a police report concerning the Duggar family. What they received was a bombshell. A 2006 report from the Springdale, Arkansas Police Department that detailed an investigation into Josh Duggar. He was accused of molesting multiple underage girls while he himself was a teenager living at home. The details were sickening. The report alleged that he had touched the breasts and genitals of multiple girls, some while they were sleeping, and that these acts had occurred on multiple occasions. Perhaps the most devastating detail of all was that several of these victims were his own sisters. The public reaction was one of utter shock and betrayal. The family's wholesome image shattered in an instant. The Duggars went into immediate damage control. They gave an interview to Megyn Kelly on Fox News, a now infamous piece of television. In that interview, they downplayed the events. They used the word inappropriate touching. They framed it as a youthful mistake that they had dealt with internally, within the church. They revealed that they had sent Josh away for a few months to do manual labor with a family friend who was supposed to provide counseling. They claimed the police report was leaked illegally and that their daughters, the real victims, were being re-victimized by the media frenzy. But the public wasn't buying it. The questions were glaring. Why wasn't this reported to the police properly at the time? Why was the focus on protecting Josh's future rather than on helping his sisters heal? The family's narrative was that they had handled it, that God had forgiven Josh, and that it was all in the past. But for the viewers at home, a crucial line had been crossed. The trust was broken. TLC swiftly pulled 19 Kids and Counting from the air. The Duggar brand was, for the moment, toxic. And Josh? He resigned from his position at the Family Research Council. He issued a public apology, calling himself the biggest hypocrite ever. He and his wife Anna retreated from public life, seemingly to work on their marriage. It appeared, for a time, that this was the end of the road for Josh Duggar's public life. He would live in quiet, private shame. But as we now know, the story was far from over. The 2015 scandal was merely the prelude. It revealed a pattern of predatory behavior, but the full force of the legal system had not yet come for Josh Duggar. That was still to come. Because while the world was focused on the molestation scandal, another, separate investigation was quietly underway. An investigation that would prove to be his undoing. Let's talk about the Ashley Madison hack. In the summer of 2015, the same year as the molestation scandal broke, a hacker group released a massive trove of data from the website Ashley Madison. For those who don't know, Ashley Madison was a website famously marketed with the tagline, "Life is short. Have an affair." Its entire business model was based on facilitating infidelity. And when that data was dumped onto the dark web, journalists and curious members of the public began sifting through it. And there, they found 2 paid accounts linked to Joshua Duggar. This was a devastating second blow. Here was the man from the family values dynasty, the one who had just been exposed as a teenage molester, now exposed as a serial cheater. He admitted to having a pornography addiction and being unfaithful to his wife. He checked into a long-term rehab facility for what was publicly described as sex addiction. The hypocrisy was staggering. The man who had built a career and a life on judging others, on advocating for a specific moral code, was revealed to be violating that very code in the most brazen way imaginable. His wife, Anna, famously stood by him. She released a statement saying she had forgiven him. The family closed ranks once again. But even this, as sordid and damaging as it was not a crime. It was a moral and personal failure of epic proportions, but it wasn't something that would send him to prison. No, for that, we have to go deeper. Into the darkest corners of the internet. This brings us to the federal investigation. The one that started with a tip from a little-known city in Arkansas. In May 2019, the Homeland Security Investigations Office in Little Rock received a referral from the Northwest Arkansas Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. They had gotten a tip about a computer at a car dealership in Springdale, Arkansas. That car dealership was called Wholesale Motor Cars, and it was owned by none other than Josh Duggar. The tip was specific. Someone had used that computer to download child sexual abuse material. Horrific material. The kind that, when described in a courtroom, would make jurors physically ill. Federal agents secured a warrant and descended on the dealership. They seized the computer, a desktop Hewlett-Packard machine, and other electronic equipment. Josh Duggar was present and was questioned. He admitted that he was the sole user of that computer. He even acknowledged that he had installed a Linux partition, a separate operating system, on the machine, a common tactic used by people trying to circumvent monitoring software or to hide their activities. The stage was set. The feds had their suspect, they had the location, and they had the hardware. Now, they just had to prove it. But this is where the investigation gets into truly fascinating, and technically complex, territory. The defense would later pounce on this complexity. You see, the dealership wasn't a secure, private office. It was a semi-public space. Other people had access. The defense would argue that someone else could have used that computer, perhaps remotely. But the digital forensics, as presented by the prosecution, were overwhelming. The agents were able to trace the activity with incredible precision. They showed that the child sexual abuse material was downloaded using the Tor browser, an anonymity network, but that the user had made a critical mistake. They had downloaded the Tor browser directly onto the desktop of the computer, rather than running it from a USB drive, which left traces on the hard drive. More importantly, the Linux operating system had been installed after the downloads began. This suggested the user was tech-savvy enough to know they needed to hide their activity, but not savvy enough to do it perfectly. The most damning piece of evidence? The user had accessed the personal banking and email accounts of Josh Duggar at the exact same time that the child sexual abuse material was being downloaded. They logged into Josh's Instagram account. They were looking at car dealership websites. The digital footprint placed Joshua Duggar, and only Joshua Duggar, at the keyboard during these crimes. The federal agents built an airtight case. In April 2021, they arrested Josh Duggar. He was charged with 2 counts of receiving and possessing child sexual abuse material. The trial was set for November 2021. It would be a media circus, but one held under the strict, somber rules of a federal courtroom. The trial was a masterclass in federal prosecution. The evidence was methodical, technical, and emotionally devastating. The defense, as expected, tried to create reasonable doubt. They argued that the Linux partition was unprotected and that someone else, a former employee, a hacker, even a random visitor, could have remotely accessed the computer and downloaded the files, framing Josh Duggar. They even brought in their own expert witness, a man who claimed it was possible. But under cross-examination, the prosecution shredded this theory. They pointed out that there was no evidence of a remote login. They emphasized the simultaneous access to Josh's personal accounts. They argued that the remote hacker theory was a fantasy, a desperate attempt to explain away the mountain of digital evidence. But the trial wasn't just about bytes and code. There was a human element, a moment of such raw power that it reportedly silenced the entire courtroom. The prosecution called one of the lead federal agents to the stand. And they asked him to describe the images and videos that were found on Josh Duggar's computer. Not in salacious detail, but in a general sense, to convey the severity of the crimes. The agent described the ages of the children, the brutal nature of the abuse. He was visibly affected, his voice shaking. He testified that it was some of the worst material he had ever seen in his entire career. In that moment, the abstract concept of downloading illegal files vanished. It was replaced with the grim, horrifying reality of the sexual torture of babies and toddlers. The jury was forced to confront what receiving child sexual abuse material truly meant. It wasn't a victimless cybercrime. It was the perpetuation of the most horrific abuse imaginable. The defense had no answer for this. How could they? You can't technically explain away that kind of evil. After a relatively short deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Josh Duggar showed little emotion as the verdict was read. His wife, Anna, was in the courtroom, and she was reportedly devastated. The judge revoked his bail and remanded him into custody immediately. He was going to prison. At his sentencing hearing in May 2022, the judge heard impact statements and arguments. The prosecution asked for the maximum sentence of 20 years, emphasizing the predatory nature of the crimes and the need to protect the public. The defense asked for leniency, arguing that Josh was a good father and that he had a difficult past. But the judge saw through it. He saw a man who had a history of preying on the vulnerable, a man who had not shown genuine remorse, a man who posed a continued danger to the community. He sentenced Joshua Duggar to 151 months, 12 years and 7 months, in federal prison. And so, Josh Duggar was assigned to FCI Seagoville, a low-security federal prison in Texas. His life as a public figure was over. He was inmate number. For nearly 2 years, he was out of the headlines. The world moved on. But the clock was always ticking. And because of good behavior and other credits, his release date was moved up. Which brings us, irrevocably, to today. So, what does his release actually look like? He isn't just being let out onto the street with a wave and a good luck. His freedom is heavily conditioned, and he will live under a microscope for years to come. He has been released into a form of federal supervision. He will have a probation officer assigned to him for 20 years. That's right, 20 years. For the next 2 decades of his life, he will have to answer to a federal officer. The terms of his supervised release are draconian, as they should be. Let me read you some of the key conditions, because they paint a very clear picture of the life he is now forced to live. No contact with minors. He cannot have any unsupervised contact with any person under the age of 18. This includes his own children. Any contact with his kids must be approved and monitored by his probation officer and likely a treatment provider. He cannot go to places where children congregate, no parks, no schools, no playgrounds, no Chuck E. Cheeses. Internet and computer restrictions. His access to the internet will be severely limited and monitored. He cannot possess any device with internet access without the prior approval of his probation officer. All of his internet history will be subject to search and review at any time. He cannot use any encryption or anonymity software like Tor. Pornography ban. He is prohibited from possessing any material depicting sexually explicit conduct. This is a blanket ban. Financial monitoring. His financial records can be inspected at any time to ensure he is not profiting from his notoriety. Participation in a sex offender treatment program. He will be required to participate in and successfully complete a treatment program for sex offenders. This will involve polygraph tests, or lie detector tests, to assess his compliance and his risk of reoffending. Curfew and location monitoring. He will likely be subject to a curfew and his whereabouts will be tracked. Now, the big question on everyone's mind is, where will he go? The most widely reported scenario is that he will not be returning to the large Duggar family home in Tontitown, where his minor siblings still live. That would be a direct violation of his release terms. Instead, it is believed that he will be residing in a halfway house or a supervised re-entry facility for a period of time before potentially moving to a private residence. Reports suggest that his wife, Anna, has secured a home for them, likely nearby in northwest Arkansas. If that is the case, that home will become a fortress of supervision. The probation officer will inspect it. Monitoring software will be installed on any approved devices. His movements in and out of the house will be logged. His interactions with his own children will be supervised, possibly by a third party approved by the court. Anna Duggar has stood by him through everything. Through the molestation revelations, through the Ashley Madison scandal, through the trial and the conviction. She has never wavered in her public support. It is one of the most perplexing and, for many, infuriating aspects of this entire saga. Her commitment to him, in the face of such overwhelming and horrific evidence, speaks to the powerful, and some would say damaging, influence of their specific religious ideology, one that emphasizes wifely submission and forgiveness at all costs. But what about the rest of the family? The Duggar family response has been mixed. The public family facade of unity has crumbled. Jim Bob and Michelle Duggar released a statement after the verdict, expressing their love for Josh but acknowledging the horrible reality of his crimes. But behind the scenes, the fractures are deep. Jill Dillard, one of Josh's sisters and a victim of his teenage molestation, has been increasingly vocal. In her book and in interviews, she has spoken about the trauma of that experience and the further trauma of having it exposed to the world. She has distanced herself from her parents' control and has been in therapy. For her, and for her sisters Jessa, Jinger, and Joanna, who were also victims, today must be an incredibly difficult and triggering day. Their abuser is free, even if he is supervised. Other siblings, like Jinger Vualo, have written about breaking free from the harmful teachings of the IBLP. Derek Dillard, Jill's husband, has been openly critical of Jim Bob Duggar's handling of the entire situation. The family is no longer a monolith. The 19 kids and counting are now adults with their own perspectives, and many of them are rightly furious, heartbroken, and scared. This brings us to the broader implications of this case. What does the story of Josh Duggar tell us? Firstly, it is a stark lesson in the dangers of performative morality. The Duggar family built an empire on telling other people how to live. They judged, they preached, they legislated. They presented themselves as the model of virtue. But behind that curtain was a system that enabled and protected a predator. The focus was always on preserving the image, on protecting the brand, rather than on protecting the actual, vulnerable children in their care. It's a devastating case of do as I say, not as I do, taken to its most horrific extreme. Secondly, it exposes the flaws in systems that handle abuse internally. The Duggars' initial response to the molestation was to handle it in-house. They went to their church elders. They sent Josh away for a few months. They did not initially go to the police. This allowed Josh to avoid legal consequences as a juvenile and, more importantly, it denied his sisters the professional help and validation they desperately needed. It sent a message that his reputation was more important than their safety and their trauma. Thirdly, this case highlights the brutal reality of child sexual abuse material. It is not a victimless crime. Every image, every video, represents a real child being tortured. By downloading and viewing that material, Josh Duggar was creating a market for that torture. He was participating in the cycle of abuse. The federal agent's testimony at the trial was crucial because it forced everyone in that room, and everyone following the case, to confront that ugly truth. And finally, his release forces us to confront the limitations of our justice system. The system has done what it can. It convicted him. It sentenced him. It is imposing strict supervision. But can it truly rehabilitate a man with such a deep-seated and long-standing pattern of deviant behavior? From his teenage molestation of his sisters, to his admitted pornography addiction and infidelity, to the consumption of the most extreme forms of child sexual abuse material? The pattern suggests a fixated sexual interest in children. That is not something that just goes away. The supervision is designed to manage his risk, not to eliminate it. It relies on him complying with the rules, on the probation officer being vigilant, and on the system having the resources to monitor him effectively. For the people in his community, for the parents in Northwest Arkansas, there will understandably be a constant, low-grade anxiety. The monster from the headlines is no longer behind a fence and barbed wire, he's in a house down the road. So, where do we go from here? Josh Duggar's life as a public figure is over. He will never be on television again. He will never have a political career. He is a registered sex offender for life. His name is permanently associated with depravity and hypocrisy. But for the survivors, his sisters, the unseen children in the images he viewed, and all survivors of childhood sexual abuse who see their own trauma reflected in this story, his release is a moment of profound fear and sadness. It is a reopening of old wounds. It is a reminder that justice, while served in a legal sense, often feels incomplete when the source of your pain is allowed to walk free. For Anna and his children, it begins a new, complicated chapter. They are now tethered to a man who will live under the constant watch of the state. Their lives will be defined by his restrictions, his therapy sessions, his probation meetings. It is a life sentence for them, too, in a way. And for us, the public, our role is to remember. To remember the victims. To remember the lies. To remember the danger of placing anyone on a pedestal of moral superiority. And to remain vigilant in holding systems accountable for protecting children, first and foremost, above all else. The story of Josh Duggar is a tragedy of biblical proportions, but it is not a story without lessons. It is a cautionary tale about secrecy, about power, about hypocrisy, and about the lifelong, devastating impact of sexual abuse. The camera may have stopped rolling on 19 kids and counting, but the real-world consequences of Josh Duggar's actions will continue to play out for decades to come. His release today is not an ending. It is simply the start of a new, and deeply unsettling, volume. Thank you for watching. I encourage you to share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below, and as always, if you or anyone you know is affected by the issues discussed in this video, please reach out to organizations like RAIN for support and resources. Take care of yourselves, and each other.